Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Rem and Sam podcast. China and the U.S. are locked in a heated battle right now. We knew at the end it would come down to these two countries. We've been eyeing each other for a while. We knew that these would be the two powerhouses. We're talking about the battle for the most gold medals at the Olympics. The Olympics, of course, are on in the background right now. It's Tuesday night. We're back for another episode. Let's see if we can get a live Olympic update. At this point, of course, we all know the events are over for the day, but we're catching up a little bit on the prime time coverage of some more diving. I didn't realize diving was such a prime time sport, but I guess diving is maybe much more of an eyeball grab than I realized it was in general. Oh, the U.S. is back on top, and we're two in front now. It's when we're recording this on Tuesday night. It's 24-22 going into the Wednesday games, and the U.S., of course, way ahead of the field when it comes to total medals at 86-59, and I think China is number two in that as well, too. Yeah, definitely number two in that. Australia, number three in gold medals and number three in medals overall. So, an interesting trio of powerhouse, countries to arise there out of the Olympics. The U.S., China, and Australia getting sneaky on the podium there. France is, I guess France is at 48 total medals. Okay. So they're actually third for the total medals, but Australia is third for gold with 14. But man, the U.S. doubling them up, and then China still hanging around there. So with this diving competition, I guess the diving competition's already technically been added to this medal count. The one that we're watching has already been added to the medal count that we're looking at right now. But I don't know what, in terms of the rest of the sports, China is expected to do well in for what's remaining, because we know the US is going to get a couple more gold medals. They're the favorites to get a couple more gold medals in the at least basketball, the 5-on-5s anyways. So I don't know if the old PRC has their equivalent of that hanging out there as well too. They got 10 medals in shooting sports, 12 medals in swimming sports for China. Pretty impressive. 16 track and field medals for the US. We knew once the track and field turned up is when we were really going to start pulling away from the field. And 28 medals overall in swimming, 13 silvers, which is still pretty impressive, especially, considering how talented the field was this year. For the rest of the countries, just being podium this many times is pretty crazy. 8 gold in swimmings as well too, which was by far the most golds. 2 fencing medals, 2 fencing golds for the other ones that we've won multiple golds in. Some rowing. Oh, we got gold in golf as well too. That's good to know. I didn't realize. Was that Scotty Scheffler that won that? Is Scotty Scheffler US? Or is he like a sneaky, motherland type guy? Pretty sure he's US born. But is Shoffley US as well too? Yeah, Scotty Scheffler wins the gold medal. So shout out to our boy taking home another crown for Team USA. Good to see us back on top. It took a second, and honestly, maybe the drama was good to keep us entertained for, a majority of the Olympics here. And then, we're really starting to head into the end of some of these really high, we're hitting the playoff games. We're starting to get to the really high level competition in some of these sports. So the gold medal games and all the other little side sports, we're starting to put a wrap up on all of those. And definitely the US, the competition from the field, keeping up with the US in those was, a fun, a fun watch. We don't want to start talking too crazy because maybe in 4 more years, the US would be losing that. Let's see if we can get a history of the gold medal count for the Olympics. Has the US been the leader the last couple of years? Maybe this is too much research to do live. Maybe IT, write this down just in case. But okay, all time, we're definitely going to be winning. Do we even need to look that up? We're not even going to look that up. We're just going to assume that the U.S. is number one. But let's see if we can go back and look at some of the past Olympics. At least the last couple. Because I'm pretty sure in Tokyo we were number one too. I'm not getting like a vibe that we weren't the overall leader that time. And China, yeah, we were the number one leader with 113 overall medals. China was number two with 89. And then the gold medal count was a lot closer that year too. So I'm just not remembering the drama of it. I guess it was the COVID Olympics, but the US had 39 gold medals and China had 38. But we were able to be number one in both of those. Don't worry, we're not going to do a whole history of the Olympics. And I'm a little confused about what the exact timeline is for the history of the Olympics because, you know, it goes back to the early 1900s. I don't know. Is there a couple of 1800 Olympics in there too? But also like the Greek, you know, the Greek days when it was first going on. Like when did they stop? I guess the Roman Empire stopped doing the Olympics once they did all the conquering and all that. I guess they had their own versions of it with the Colosseum and different sporting events like that. They didn't do the exact Olympics, but maybe of all the things that they should have taken from the Greeks, the Olympics should have been one of them. Yeah, U.S., of course, number one in 2016, Rio as well, too. The Sochi Olympics. I don't feel like... I know sneaky the summer winter Olympic like fandom might be kind of close, but for me, I really like watching the Summer Olympics. Yeah, the U.S. again in 2012 as well too was the medal count. So I feel like this streak's been going on for a while. Maybe we'll get back. We'll do the full on research. We'll get back to you guys, and maybe we won't get too presumptive either, because the U.S. is only 2 medals ahead of China as well too. So like we said, they could definitely still, you know, we'll still give them a chance there. They could still definitely catch up, but we'll update you guys on the weekend episode as to how we'll just update you on how long the US streak has been going for. Because like we say, it's at least been going for the last, I would assume it's been going for this whole century and maybe a while. It was one of the ones where we lost those basketball Olympics. I know we lost it in 2004, but come on. I mean, we still got gold in that, but I don't, you know, that might be a sneaky one as well too, because Phelps was an early one in that he was early in his Olympic career. I think that was his first Olympics. So he wasn't like sweeping the gold medals. I think he had a couple of bronze, maybe a silver in there as well. So he wasn't just top dog all the way. So maybe we didn't get the number one in 2004. But I mean, who are we kidding? Come on. We were the number one medal count team in 2004. But shout out to the Olympics once again for a pretty good Olympics so far. Like I said, I think it's been a pretty fun watch. Who knows if we'll do some more watching this Friday with Sam, because this Friday, make no mistake, it's going to be a sneaky stack sports day if you are really taking into consideration all the sports that are going on, because we've got, of course, the Olympics, but some NFL preseason is starting. NFL preseason starts Thursday night with 1 or 2 games, and then we get a couple more Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Holy cow, the NFL is starting to take over the schedule. And we're also getting the UFA playoffs on Friday. So make no mistake, the sports calendar is just stacked that day with great high-level sporting events. Well, maybe not the NFL preseason, but definitely the UFA playoffs and the Olympics is about as a competitive of a sporting event and sporting environments as you can get if you guys are wanting to watch high-level competition at its best. The UFA is where it's at. So we're just going to be Sports HQ maybe Friday. I don't know what direction we'll take it, but make no mistake, you guys are going to want to be locked in this weekend. It's going to be a lot of fun, but we were talking a little bit about fantasy football on the last episode, and it's August. Like I said, it's fantasy football season. So make no mistake, we're just going to keep going talking about fantasy football. because that is what is in the air right now. And like I was saying on the last episode, this is when I feel like if you're a good league, the leagues start to get the drafting underway. And make no mistake, the leagues that I'm in, the group chats have all started to fire up, and leagues are getting underway now. And draft prep is definitely underway. So I know we were looking a little bit at the receivers last week, and sometimes you make like a big board, and like I said, we were talking it out. And when I make a list of guys, make no mistake, it does constantly change. But I do feel like the receiver list that we had for the most part was pretty solid. Maybe it's like the pairs that we had paired up, I feel like they're all in the right spot. Like we had Jefferson. We were kind of talking back and forth between Jefferson and Chase. There was some like Amon-Ra St. Brown and AJ Brown, back and forth, CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill. So I feel like we got everybody in the generally the right area, but I guess I was going to say the rankings are solid, but I guess they have probably changed a little bit. But we're going to try to attack the running back rankings today for fantasy. And this is another one where I didn't really know what was going to happen when I started, just kind of looking at some of the guys and seeing really, because I think the number one thing for me with fantasy, and especially with the running back position the last couple of years, is, and I guess for drafting as well too, because for you get into waiver wires and there's different aspects to the managing your fantasy team, but for drafting anyways, I just go for almost just peace of mind and again, especially for the running back position, because for the receiver position right now, and I know we were talking about mainly the top guys last week, and as we look at the breakout guys, and we will eventually adopt a fantasy son as well. Make no mistake, we haven't forgot about that. But the receiver position, I mean, we all know if we're looking at the draft boards, it's just insane. There's an insane amount of guys that you could feel confident in being like a very competent wide receiver 1 level type guy for your team, or an insane amount of guys for that tier of player, or just like the amount of guys that you're like, hey, this guy's going to be like a confident wide receiver level 2. I've got good depth at this spot. I feel good just week to week. Again, the peace of mind, like the fantasy production that you're going to get from the receivers are going to be pretty solid. The running back position, not so much, and it's kind of been that way the whole time we've been playing fantasy, but I feel like this year is really extreme compared to some of the other years, where going into it, looking at the board and looking at some of the guys as well too, you kind of start talking yourself into some more guys as you go through it. But if we're just talking that peace of mind, like I take the guy I know I'm going to get, and we're talking especially the top of the board as well too, that elite production. There's really, I was going to say 6 running backs that I feel really good about, but I'll say 5.5 running backs, and one, a good running back that's in a good situation. And I feel like we're going to have to give him the benefit of the doubt and put him on the list and say 6. But if you look at the top 6 guys for running back ADP, it's McCaffrey, Breece Hall. And again, this is all ESPN stuff. McCaffrey, Breece Hall, Bijan, Saquon, Jonathan Taylor, and Jahmyr Gibbs. And then the next 6 guys for running back ADP: Kyren Williams, Derrick Henry, Isaiah Pacheco, Travis Etienne, Joe Mixon, and James Cook. And like I said, you talk yourself into some guys. I've definitely started to talk myself into that tier a little bit more. But regardless of how, it's like, okay, maybe I'm a little bit more warmed up to the idea of taking that guy in that spot. I feel like for this year, the running back tiers are really dramatic compared to years past. And that top tier of running backs, and maybe Kyren Williams is another guy that's kind of bordering into tier 1. But I think as of right now, I would keep him in tier 2. It's close for Kyren Williams, but I think right now I'm keeping him in tier 2. And there was probably going to be, another breakout guy as well too. It's probably, of course, it's never going to go chalk, but for the fantasy peace of mind for the running back position, those would be like the main guys that I would feel super good about, as you can be an RB1. And those are all guys being drafted as RB1s. But the rest of the board, like I said, I don't necessarily look at any of the other guys and feel confident that they're going to be like an actual, and depending on league size, like there's 10 teams, 12 teams. I guess technically, 10 to 12 running backs are going to be RB1 level running backs, depending on how you look at the league. But I'm talking about, like an actual RB1. If we're like a little historical comparison year to year, like what feels like an RB1 level running back season, those are the guys that I actually feel like can have that season. And I don't feel as confident about finding the breakout running back as I would in years past. There are a couple, make no mistake, there's always a couple of guys where you go, okay, there's definitely good value here for where you're getting them. And there's definitely one, probably pretty obvious one as well too, if you're looking at the ESPN rankings. But nobody that I would feel good about, because for me too as well, when you're taking a breakout guy, it's not just do I want him at his ADP, like the value at that spot, but if I felt like, depending on the league, if there was like a buzz in the league that maybe that guy was a little bit of a trendy pick and maybe some other teams wanted him, would I feel good about drafting this guy even higher than I would plan, originally want to, based on his ADP, just because I want him and I feel like I value his breakout season so much. And again, I just don't feel that strongly for the running back position for that guy, where I feel, okay, yeah, if I get the guy in this spot, then that's good value, but I don't know if I would necessarily reach for this guy as well too. So when I was doing some of the mocks and just messing around trying to see what the best way to build a team is, and I was trying to do a mock from some of the different spots in the draft as well too, I feel like sneaky this year, the best spot in the draft might be near the end of the first round in like a 10 or a 12 man league, and just maybe go like back to back with, again, there's like, if for me, I have those 5 to 6 running backs that I could definitely be like, okay, yeah, I feel really strongly about that guy. And just going with 2 of those running backs, because the receiver position is 35 guys long, where, even a guy like 30, you're like, you could maybe be a little bit of a, I can maybe build a deep receiver room and make up for not having one of the elite guys, but just grab 2 running backs that I feel confident in, and in theory, just not have to worry about it for finding the breakout guy and working the waiver wire. And just for me, I just don't want to mess with the running back position this year. And I almost just want to take 2 guys and not have to think about it. Of course, health is going to be the major thing with any running back. But I mean, that's, again, with any running backs, I don't feel like, unless, of course, it's a guy with maybe some kind of history, then obviously you have to take that into account. But I don't know if I would not take a running back with no injury history, or, little injury history. I don't know if I would avoid him just because the running back position is injury prone, especially this year, where, a guy, like the young guys like Bijan, Breece Hall, who does have a little bit of an injury history already, but Jahmyr Gibbs as well too. Like, I wouldn't just be like, well, I can't take 2 of those guys because the running back position's not that there. It's not that healthy. You never know. Because like right now, Bijan is ADP 6 and Jahmyr Gibbs is ADP 15. So I'd have to, I'm not smart enough to calculate a snake draft and figure out if you could get those guys. If you had the 6th pick in the draft and you grab Bijan, if you're able to swing back around and get Jahmyr Gibbs there. But I wouldn't avoid doing that because I feel like the running back position is injury prone. I would be totally fine for stacking the running backs early. I think that's totally the way to go. McCaffrey right now is sitting at the number 1 running back spot. And he's kind of not just consensus like number 1 running back, he's kind of consensus number 1 player right now in fantasy. And I mean, I totally understand, especially based on the season he had last year where, he's over 2,000 yards and over 19 touchdowns as well too overall. 2,000 scrimmage yards, not necessarily rush yards, but 2,000 yards from scrimmage and 19 total touchdowns, which is actually the second time he's done that now in his career. So the only guys to do that 2 times are working backwards. So CMC, Larry Johnson did it twice playing for the Chiefs. Priest Holmes as well too. So back-to-back Chiefs running backs. I don't know, were they back-to-back in the Chiefs run, but back-to-back Chiefs running backs on the history list anyways to do it. And then Marshall Faulk. I think Marshall Faulk might have done it more than 2 times in a row. Let's double check this. And I guess we weren't even talking about doing it back-to-back. Pause. We were just talking about doing it twice in your career in general. Oh yeah, I guess we were talking 19 total touchdowns too, because Marshall Faulk had 4 straight years of 2,000 total scrimmage yards. Just insane. But the last 2 years, 2,100 yards, 26 touchdowns, and 2,100 yards, 21 touchdowns, which would qualify for what we're talking about. And then Emmitt Smith did it twice as well too. But to put him just right back at being that consensus number 1 spot, this season is, I mean, it's not just pivotal from like hey, he's going to be 28 this year and he's going to be at the point, not just from I guess it is, yeah, from a mileage standpoint, not from the age, but he's also, again, had some injuries and had some big seasons like this before where he's gotten some good work. And, he was efficient with it this year from a per carriage standpoint. Necessarily wasn't like a 300 touch guy this year, I don't think. Here, let's double check CMC. I feel like he was under 300 touches for 2,000 yards, which is pretty crazy. Oh no, yeah, he was 339 for total touches this year. 329 last year, 1,800 yards. The last year he was 2,000 yards. He was 400 touches and 19 touchdowns that year. So maybe the number was off my head a little bit. Maybe it's like a 350 cutoff for that type of thing. But he is on the border of, is he just, obviously he's a great running back, but if he goes for another number 1 overall fantasy season, now we're talking, and just what that would mean from a number standpoint to get back into that spot to lead all running backs. And the bar is not as high as it was, make no mistake, the last couple of years, but still to be the number 1 running back in the league from a statistical standpoint. Now we're probably talking about Christian McCaffrey as a top 10. Like, is he a top 10 running back of all time just for having this kind of a season? And also, he has put up 1,800 scrimmage yards 4 times in his career, which the only guys to do it 5 or more times. Also, Emmitt Smith and Marshall Faulk, LaDainian Tomlinson, and Walter Payton. So, I mean, he could probably be the number 1 fantasy running back without having 1,800 yards. I mean, he could have done it this past year, I'm pretty sure. I think Breece Hall was the number 2 fantasy running back, but I think he was the number 2 scrimmage yardage running back as well too. And he was at 1,585 yards. I mean, yeah, McCaffrey can dip down to, 1,500 yards. And Breece Hall only had 9 touchdowns as well too. So if McCaffrey's 1,500 yards, 12 total, 15 total touchdowns, 1,600 yards, then he's probably still the number 1 fantasy running back. Again, and like we talked about with CeeDee Lamb last week, you're taking the number 1 guy. It's not like, okay, does he need to be the exact number 1 guy at the position? I get that's like a very, very high standard to hold it to. Can I get an elite level season from him? I still need to put the talent around him to have a championship team, obviously. But hey, I mean, we all know in fantasy, Yeah, you can kind of sneaky get carried by two or three guys if they're really having elite seasons and win the title doing that way. Especially, if McCaffrey's having the 2,000-yard, 20 touchdown season versus, whatever we might project him out as next year. But again, Walter Payton, Tomlinson, Marshall Faulk, Emmitt Smith, those are four of the 10 best running backs of all time. And McCaffrey, if he's back in that elite level season, then now it's McCaffrey. And I'm not saying that is not going to happen. This is not McCaffrey is not a top 10 running back of all time. It's just, what do you think of McCaffrey historically? Because I think that is what is in play now when we're looking at McCaffrey year to year. Because, and some running backs have been able to do a legacy turn later in their career. Like Tiki Barber, I think, had a run in his later 20s and in his 30s. And I'm not saying just because he's starting to cross the line and get into his late 20s is where the fall off is going to happen. And 28 as well, too, is an age where a lot of running backs have had, amazing. John Alexander, I think, had like 1,800 yards at 28. So not impossible that Christian McCaffrey by any means could be the number one running back. But we were talking about this last week with CeeDee Lamb as well, too. We floated this out there, and I was curious what it was. And I went back and looked, but we were talking about how often does a guy finish the number one player in back-to-back years? And if you go for the receiver position, it's actually pretty common. I know we mentioned Antonio Brown last week, and we weren't looking at PPR points when we were doing the quick research, but in PPR points, he was the leader 4 times in a row. Calvin Johnson led back-to-back years. He was 3 out of 4 years as well, too, as a leader. Andre Johnson back-to-back years. Marvin Harrison, 4 years in a row. Jerry Rice, if we want to go way back, 4 years in a row. So, much easier for a receiver to lead the league in fantasy points multiple times in a row. Hasn't happened since Antonio Brown, though, yet since then. So we had Tyreek Hill, Michael Thomas, Devontae Adams, Cooper Kupp, Justin Jefferson, and then CeeDee Lamb last year. But if you go for the running back position, the last guys to go finish number one back-to-back years, some very common names that we keep bringing up, but Priest Holmes, and then Marshall Faulk, and then Emmitt Smith. So again, Priest Holmes maybe could McCaffrey go in like the Priest Holmes territory? Because I don't know, is Priest Holmes like a consensus top 10 guy of all time? I feel like Marshall Faulk kind of has to be. I know he's had some controversial things, but come on, like we said, the 4 straight years, 2,000 yards. We know what he meant to the greatest show on turf. Smith, Peyton. Let's do let's just double check the Priest Holmes career log here. I was going to say definitely a Hall of Famer, but not in the Hall of Fame at this moment. 3 All-Pro appearances for Priest Holmes, 3 Pro Bowlers, a 3-time Pro Bowler, the 2002 AP Offensive Player of the Year, finished top 5 in MVP voting back-to-back years as well, too, in that little 3-year run. So I guess it really was just like a little boom there for Priest Holmes. But he also, again, in his later 20s, 28, 29, and 30, was when he really made his mark in the league. But if you look at his run before that, entered the league at 24, and then they don't even have I don't even think he logged a carry his rookie year. 233 carries in 16 games, 89 carries in 9 games, and 137 carries in 16 games in Baltimore before going to Kansas City, where he finally was able to break out. Maybe there's definitely some injury stuff there. It's probably to why he was not playing, but not like he was getting a lot of wear and tear going into his later years versus McCaffrey has already kind of had the legacy run. I don't know if anybody is, I guess like Emmitt Smith, the running backs have had the sustained run of greatness for sure, but definitely in terms of a career tipping point for McCaffrey, I think it's going to be a very important historical season to see what kind of level he gets back to. But I wouldn't, I mean, I wouldn't have him outside. If you're going to get super aggressive in your big board and try to get super crazy, I couldn't see you putting him any lower than 3. And, maybe the Trent Williams offensive line, there's some little bit of contract drama there. The offensive line sneaky was a little bit shaky last year, even though the run blocking was pretty on point. And a lot of that was Trent Williams as well, too. And again, with the age thing, as we're recording this today, within the last hour or so, there was news that McCaffrey is dealing with an injury and was, I don't think we expected him to play in preseason anyways, but officially out at this point because of the injury that he is dealing with and that the Niners just announced. But, just another little thing to kind of keep an eye on with running backs at this stage in their career. And it's every running back once they get at this stage in their career, because we know the life cycle of running backs. So when you're drafting him as your number 1 player on your board, you just don't want to get burned. And it's not even like, is McCaffrey going to, again, fall off and be a bad running back or anything like that, but just a 28-year-old running back. Are we going to trust him to stay healthy for the entire season? I think so. I still would feel pretty good about it. I feel like the wedding this year, the celebrity girlfriend, it's all extra motivation to get out there and play as much as possible. To some people, it's extra motivation to stay home, but extra motivation to go out there and keep proving yourself in the world. Because make no mistake, his lady is crushing it, and he's a competitive guy as well too. So I know it's not a competition in relationships, but you get what we're saying. But right now, I have McCaffrey number 2 on my board, and I might just end up, if I get the number 1 pick in any of the leagues that I'm in, I might just end up taking McCaffrey and playing it safe. And when he is healthy, he's always been a league winner as well too. So until that changes, it's just one of those things. Maybe we just need to see it change before we actually change it ourselves. But Breece Hall, who was the number 2 running back in fantasy last year, he is ADP the number 2 running back right now as well. And if you've been locked into the Rem and Sam pod, especially if you've listened to some of the fantasy stuff in the past, I feel like you're not surprised that we would get to the point where we would be defending Breece Hall as the number 1 running back in fantasy, because we definitely had, and still have, and I think are still always buying up the Breece Hall stock, even though at this point it is, I don't want to say getting priced out, but again, he's the number 2 running back in ADP. So in terms of fantasy adoption for a breakout player, he's way past that, but kind of underrated how he was able to put together the fantasy production that he was last year, because he kind of feels a little bit like the new Austin Eckler in that he's got the dual threat thing for sure. Like, great receiving running back. The receiving thing is definitely part of the, definitely the main reason why he was able to, from a total yardage standpoint, be elevated above all the other running backs in the league besides McCaffrey. But again, finished RB2 last year from a fantasy standpoint and had 12 games where he had under 60 rush yards. But that was kind of his average that's actually kind of his average for his career is 60, but also was able to throw some of that extra receiving work there on top. But again, for his career, averages about 60 rush yards a game and 30 receiving yards a game, and about a half a touchdown a game. So at 90 scrimmage yards a game and half a touchdown a game, you're putting him on pace for about 14 to 1,500 yards in double-digit touchdowns. And that's, again, those per-game averages are pretty consistent the last couple of years, despite the fact that he's been a little bit in and out with injury. But that receiving baseline makes him a little bit safer as a fantasy prospect. And, the McCaffrey receiving thing is definitely there as well, too. But, again, as he is further advances in his career, the Niners are probably going to be careful with how they want to manage him, because they're still Super Bowl focused as well. They're still going to need to save him for the playoffs and still be focused on, the run later in the season. but that Brees Hall receiving baseline, he's going to be hovering near that 100 yards scrimmage game per game. And if he's doing the receiving thing and getting a couple of receptions, I mean, that's like those couple extra points is like 30 to 40 extra yards as well, too, from a running back standpoint, just from like a running back primary guy. And my main concern with Brees Hall would honestly be, if you want to say injuries too, I guess, but just how confident are you in the Jets offense this year? And I get the Aaron Rodgers thing is probably going to be an upgrade, but are they still going to be that competitive in the league? I know there's already some training camp videos. Him and Garrett Wilson are arguing. Garrett Wilson doesn't like the ayahuasca. Aaron Rodgers doesn't like the way he's breaking off the slants. It seems like the vibes are maybe the whole team just needs to go do a darkness retreat and get on the same page before the season starts. Who knows? But I mean, Brees Hall was the RB2 last year, and who was their quarterback? I mean, we were talking about Jefferson last week playing and producing without good quarterbacks. I don't even remember who the Jets had. I guess there was that Flacco run where Brees Hall. No, Flacco was the Browns last year. Was Flacco Jets and Browns last year? What a career for Joe Flacco. Super Bowl for the Ravens. And then, no, he was Cleveland the entire time for 2023. Oh, yeah, it was, I guess, that's how forgettable the Zach Wilson performance was last year. 12 games started for Zach Wilson, and then a few Trevor Siemian starts in there as well. So maybe Zach Wilson checkdown city was, do we get that again from Aaron Rodgers? But just the overall offense moving the ball a little bit more is going to probably help the Jets, overall skill guys, Garrett Wilson and Brees Hall, specifically from a numbers standpoint. And if you look at running backs that their percentage of touches in the red zone for last season, Brees Hall was, let me look here, I believe second lowest amongst running backs with more than 200 carries. So of like the main usage guys, he was only at 9% of his carries were inside the red zone. For the 200 plus guys, Jerome Ford was actually the lowest at 7.8%. But again, if we're doing for our big board this year, I don't know how relevant the Jerome Ford stats are. Definitely relevant. We'll definitely keep them in mind. We got to make sure we're keeping locked in on everybody. But for the first round, top of the draft, Brees Hall was second lowest at 9.4%. And then Bijan was the third lowest, Bijan Robinson, at 10.7%. So definitely something to keep in mind with Bijan as well. But just having Aaron Rodgers out there as well. Like, I might have my questions from a competitive standpoint, but he is an upgrade. The offense is going to move better. And like with Jefferson, Brees Hall proved that he can perform. And they haven't had that. They've had that level of quarterback play for the last two seasons as well. So really could just the competency and maybe just the stability and just the know-how as well too, where if the defense is in a certain look that benefits Brees Hall, maybe Aaron Rodgers is able to get him the ball more effectively, check into the look, and just all those little things that bring in not just a veteran like Aaron Rodgers, but a great quarterback like Aaron Rodgers can. It's just going to be a better scene than having Zach Wilson in there at quarterback. Hopefully, we'll see. I say that now. Flip it, because we might be running this in a couple of months when they're benching. Who is even the backup right now for Aaron Rodgers? I don't know. They were not thinking plan B last year, and make no mistake, they're not thinking plan B again this year. But Brees Hall would be one if you want to get super aggressive and say, okay, I really think Brees Hall is gonna have a better season than McCaffrey. I would be totally, I could co-sign that. I was maybe not 100%, but I could co-sign that fairly confidently and go, yeah, Brees Hall is definitely a guy that you could have over McCaffrey on your big board. We mentioned Bijan for the low usage red zone guys, which I think it's a very important note. But if we mention Bijan, I think we also have to mention Jahmyr Gibbs as well, too, because I think these year two running backs are a lot closer than maybe people are realizing. And here, let's double check that ADP again for both these guys, because they were both in the top 6. But Gibbs is number 6 and Bijan is number 3. That's for the running back position. In terms of actual draft pick, I guess we did read that earlier now that I remember. But yeah, Bijan is average draft pick 6, 7, going in that range. Jahmyr Gibbs pick 15, 16. So, I guess, you can get Bijan first round versus Gibbs second round. And Bijan was the guy with the generational label last year. And I think there are still some plays where you just watch Bijan and you go, yeah, this guy is like everything that he's advertised to be. He's just absolutely incredible. The athleticism is off the charts. But you just go back and you remember and actually look at the numbers that he had. Less than 1,000 yards for a top 10 pick at the running back position. And if you look at the guys that have been top 10 picks at the running back position since 2000, the guys that have gotten over 1,000 yards rushing in their rookie season, we can just read. I'll just read the list of guys. Let me know if you guys like these running backs, whether or not they're good players. So let's go backwards, starting with the most recent. Guys that got 1,000 yards rushing as a rookie that were a top 10 running back pick since 2000. Saquon, 2018 draft. Leonard Fournette, 2017 draft, who I get, probably a little overdrafted, but really important to that Tampa Bay team that made a couple playoff runs there with Tom Brady. Ezekiel Elliott had a elite run to start his career. Todd Gurley almost won an MVP. Adrian Peterson, Cadillac Williams. Cadillac Williams, I think we all would have known that he would have been a good running back. LaDainian Tomlinson, and then Jamal Lewis as well, too. Just one of the underrated, forgotten production guys of the early 2000s. The running backs that didn't get 1,000 rushing yards and were top 10 picks in this time frame. Again, going backwards, the first one, this is going to sound like okay, what's totally wrong with this list? But Christian McCaffrey, 2017, didn't get 1,000 rush yards, so keep that in mind. But outside of that, outside of just the number one running back in fantasy and the number one running back in the league right now, going backwards, Trent Richardson, 2012, CJ Spiller, 2010, Ronnie Brown, 2005. I know Ronnie Brown had the Wildcat year. The Dolphins won the division. Maybe I need to put a little more respect on Ronnie Brown's name. Cedric Benson, 2005. Thomas Jones, 2000. Thomas Jones, of course, very solid running back. Thomas Jones got a Hall of Fame nomination, I think, this past year. So maybe I'm underrating Thomas Jones. I need to put more respect on his name. But I think if it's like, okay, which group of guys would you rather have, Group A or Group B? I think we're all taking Group A. And I think, even Cedric Benson, Thomas Jones versus a guy like Jamal Lewis, there's just a little bit of a different tier to the type of running back that he was. I mean, Jamal Lewis had a 2,000-yard season, was fourth in MVP voting in 2003. Both of them over 10,000 career total yards. Not the Yodel kid from Walmart. Total yards. Maybe a little closer for those two guys than I was thinking as well. Thomas Jones never made an All-Pro team. Only one Pro Bowl for Thomas Jones. One Pro Bowl for Jamal Lewis. But that seems kind of crazy as well. And was he the Pro Football Writers Association MVP in 2003? So, I mean, some of the associations out there thought he was the best player in the league in 2003. That's a little bit of better than I think Thomas Jones' season. No disrespect to Thomas Jones. But, again, I'm maybe being a little dramatic with Bijan because I think you could easily chalk it up to just usage. And I think he's like at 970 some yards as well, too. So it's like, okay, if Arthur Smith just gives him the couple more carries that he probably should have gotten, then it's not like Bijan, again, wasn't showing and producing like a 1,000-yard level RB. Like, he definitely checked all the boxes, but it was a very glaring difference in the list, again, to look at that list. Outside of McCaffrey, who, again, had a usage case. I don't even think he had 200 carries in his rookie year versus Bijan this year. Definitely did. and played a lot of snaps as well too. Is fifth in total snaps for running back, which when I looked at that was not necessarily expecting that, because it was like, okay, Arthur Smith is using Algier too much, but it was like, no, Bijan is definitely still on the field. But I went back and just like watched a ton of Bijan highlights the last couple of days because I just was trying to remind myself of what his rookie season was like. And it is crazy, again, looking at that stat too as well for running back red zone percentage. It is crazy watching the highlights how much of his carries take place in just like the middle of the field. And it's like, okay, obviously Bijan's athletic enough. Maybe any potential play is a scoring opportunity. I get it. But actually getting him the ball in position to score. And let's see how many total touchdowns he had last year as well, too, because he might have been like 2 touchdowns last year. And Kirk Cousins is just, the Aaron Rodgers thing. I might just going into next year might rather have Kirk Cousins than Aaron Rodgers. I don't even know. Is that a hot take? Rem and Sam, the DMs are open on Instagram if that's a hot take. And I'll definitely, I'm just thinking that, I'm just throwing that out there as well, too. That's not a well-crafted take. But Bijan was, no, he had a couple of receiving touchdowns in there as well, too, but only 4 rushing touchdowns, 4 receiving touchdowns. So managed to, Bijan still managed 1,400 scrimmage yards in 8 total touchdowns for a season that was like, okay, maybe he's not getting the ball quite enough. But really, I bring up the numbers for Bijan to be like, it's kind of what Jahmyr Gibbs did last year as well, too. And I know that from a draft standpoint, they weren't taken that far apart. So maybe the expectation shouldn't be that much different, but it feels like they are a little bit. And if you look at some of the advanced numbers as well, too, you start looking at like the yards after contact. Jahmyr Gibbs is like a little bit better than Bijan. And Jahmyr Gibbs was actually just like, in some of the advanced numbers, just straight up one of the better running backs in the league last year. And David Montgomery as well, too, is there. I get it. I get the value that he brings to that running back room, and the dynamic that he adds is still like a valuable asset to that offense. It's not just, oh, they have 2 good running backs and they still feel like they need to get Montgomery the ball in some way. It's like, no, actually, his skill set is a different dynamic in a way that is still beneficial to the whole thing. And then you bring in Jahmyr Gibbs to do his thing. But I still feel like last year was a little bit of, okay, Jahmyr Gibbs is the rookie. We're going to work him in, and Montgomery's the veteran, and he is still the more than serviceable guy that can be the quote unquote lead running back in the offense when we need him to be. But I mean, we all saw Jahmyr Gibbs last year. And again, like I was saying, the numbers point to him just with when he has the ball, he's one of the more dynamic ball carriers in the league. And I don't know how you draft him at 12 and go, okay, long term, he's not going to be a huge focal point of the offense. Maybe it was like, oh, and like we're saying with the numbers, maybe it's just the weapon that he was such a dynamic weapon that you have to take him at 12. And the way he's playing, it's like, maybe they're thinking light years ahead. And I can't say that they're wrong either, but I wouldn't be shocked if it was, hey, this is Jahmyr Gibbs, he's going to be the lead guy on the team. Whereas last year, he was still even the number 2 guy into the playoffs. But at the end of that playoff game against the Niners, when they really needed to move the ball, I think they went to Jahmyr Gibbs in some of the more important situations. And I thought that was really telling maybe for, hey, we already kind of trust him over the course of this rookie season. And maybe after the offseason, we trust him a little bit more. And I think Montgomery is like a great flex option, rotation guy to have on your team as well, too, for fantasy this year. I'm not saying that Jahmyr Gibbs is going to squash him from fantasy relevance, but I would not view Montgomery as a hindrance to Gibbs this year. I think Gibbs is an elite enough running back talent to overcome that on himself. And I think he's potentially able to put up the numbers that Bijan could put up, despite the fact that he's in a running back committee as well, too. And Bijan is in a committee with Algier there as well. Who knows with the coaching change? Maybe that changes. I mean, the Falcons invested a little bit more in Bijan than the Lions did in Gibbs. Well, maybe they didn't because the Lions made the trade up. But did the Falcons trade for that 8th pick? I think that was just the 8th pick just sounds like where the Falcons would be drafting at. Anyways, it sounds like their range for them. So maybe the Lions did invest more by trading for Gibbs. But I would have those guys right next to each other on my big board. And if Bijan is the number 6 pick in the draft and you like Gibbs a little bit more, I would take, and you take Gibbs 6, like I would be totally okay with that as well too. Gibbs over McCaffrey is now you guys are going to start tuning out. Now it's hot take time. We don't want to, go fantasy QAnon on everybody, but I'm all in on a Jahmyr Gibbs breakout season. Again, I don't know if he's adoptable as the number 6 ADP running back, as a top 15 pick, but maybe we'll consult the champ Quinn. As a Lions player, he might not have any problems with it either. But if we adopt like a top 15 guy and go, okay, he's going to be like a number, I guess it would have to be, he's going to be the number 1 guy in fantasy because, it's like adopt a guy in the 40s to 60-ish range, and he's going to be like a top 10 player. Adopt a guy later than that, and he's going to be top 15, borderline starter, like when we're talking like RB1, wide receiver 1 type guy. So there are tiers to it. I wonder if the tiers could apply for like the elite level guys, because I would definitely consider putting Jahmyr Gibbs on that list. Again, I don't know if we can adopt Breece Hall as the number 2 guy and say he's going to be number 1. That might be a little bit of a stretch for breakout, but Jahmyr Gibbs, just in terms of, he is actually fully like one of the best running backs in the league. I could totally see that this year. And don't forget about Jonathan Taylor as well. I know, like we're saying, I'm not like super thrilled on the depth of the running back position this year, but this is like a nice little crowded top 6 of guys, I think, to have here between McCaffrey, Breece Hall, Bijan and Gibbs, and then Jonathan Taylor, because he's going to be fully healthy. The offensive line is hopefully going to be, better from a run blocking standpoint. Taylor led the league in yards after contact. He was averaging almost 4.5 yards after contact last year. I mean, Bijan was averaging less than 4.5 yards per carry just in general. So don't forget about Jonathan Taylor could Jonathan Taylor just be the best running back again in fantasy? I mean, don't discount it, because they're going to need to still bring, they're going to need to bring along Anthony Richardson. He's going to have his lumps as a passer. And Jonathan Taylor is going to still be a focal point of the offense in a major way. And having Richardson as a run-focused QB, maybe just the run-centric offense, it's still like, okay, Taylor is still going to be like really one of the main high-level usage guys across the league. And maybe maybe Richardson takes away from those carries, but I feel like you're also going to want to coach Richardson up on being smart as well too. So using Jonathan Taylor, you pay your running backs to run him into the ground. We don't want the quarterbacks to be taking that kind of abuse. That's what I guess the running backs don't get paid for that. Unfortunately, they get underpaid and overworked. Can the running backs? Well, I guess they do have a union. It's called the NFL Players Union, but maybe they need to step up and help with the running backs a little bit. So those would be my top 6 guys. Saquon right now is ADP 4 for the running backs. He is average pick number 12 in draft. So you can get him at the end of a first round, essentially. I feel like a 12-team league is a pretty standard league. Maybe a 10-team league, but I mean, come on. If you're listening, we're pro players here. We're not trying to play small leagues, because teams get really stacked as well. You get like an 8-man league. I played in a couple of 8-man leagues back in the day, and it was definitely like, when you're early in fantasy, you're warming up and it's all you don't really realize it. But once you go and play a couple of 10-man leagues and then like see 8-man leagues again, I remember I saw a couple of 8-man league rosters last year, and I was like, the league size, like you can get I was like, holy cow, the draft was insane. And then I was looking at the rest of the teams. I was like, oh yeah, no, this is actually just a really stacked league because of the league size. But Saquon, I would have as the 6 RB. And Saquon, like I was saying, I have 5.5 to 6 RBs that I feel really good about. I would put those top 5 in kind of a tier themselves, and then maybe Saquon Barkley and Kyron Williams in their own tier, like a little 2-man tier, because again, Saquon, when he is out there, he's still proven to be like a top 7 running back from a production standpoint. the Eagles O-line, even without Kelsey, that whole offense, it's a major upgrade. And kind of like I was saying with Richardson, I wonder if they're bringing in Saquon to be like, hey, are we going to start adjusting a little bit how we're going to use Hurts? Because I know the tush push has been insanely effective for the Eagles the last couple of years, but is that long term what you want to be doing with your quarterback? Is just subjecting doing those kind of plays. So, like I said, that's what we bring in the running backs for. I think there's a lot of goal line, red zone usage for Saquon to have if they don't want Jalen Hurts necessarily doing that, because there's always the scramble thing with Hurts. But I think just the amount of designed QB runs, and again, even on the goal line, just the amount of times that they were using the tush push was pretty crazy. I think Jalen Hurts had like 14 touchdowns from inside the 10-yard line last year. He had 15 rushing touchdowns overall, and 14 of them were from inside the 10-yard line. So I guess he's not like a Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray. He's going to like have like the 40-yard run necessarily. I guess, powerful runner. Like that's why I use him on the tush push. That makes sense for him. But 14 is also like a crazy amount of touchdowns, which I think Saquon, can we have a couple of those? A little welfare to our running backs, a little touchdown welfare. Can we get Saquon some of that production? So I would just have him kind of on the outside looking in. And Kyren Williams last year, again, when he was out on the field, he was sneaky, like maybe the best running back in the league when he was out there. McCaffrey was definitely the best running back, but Kyren Williams was probably number 2. And from a yardage from a per game standpoint, he might have been number 1. I believe he was 95. He was number 1 for rush yards per game anyways. I don't know if you throw in the receiving, what he would have gone up to. Yeah, 95 rush yards a game. And then scrimmage yards, he would have been at 112. McCaffrey last year was 91 rush yards a game. In scrimmage yards, he was at 126. So the receiving definitely a little bit more for McCaffrey, of course, like we were saying. Best running back in the league. But Kyren was, at least from a number standpoint, probably number 2, but definitely a heavy usage guy as well. And they bring in Blake Corum. Stuff a shocker. We have a lot of Blake Corum stock on that team. I think, the running back, of course, you wanted to produce early, but I think Blake Corum definitely can for that team. And he's a veteran guy as well, too. With playing with Harbaugh and just being a leader on that Michigan team, I think he's a smart guy. And I think he can step on the field right away. So you can kind of keep Kyren Williams healthy. And again, he'll still be like, I would have him with Saquon, RB6, RB7, right in that range. But I don't know if he's going to be back in the mix for, is he the number 1 running back in fantasy? Maybe McVay just uses the running backs that way, and I need to reconsider. And just that offensive scheme is going to lend itself to Kyren being productive. But again, I think with Corum in there, that could be a situation where I do really sneaky like a bunch of the rookies this year. But it's definitely more like, hey, is this guy gonna break into being like a flex guy, or is he gonna break into being like a really high level handcuff in case there is an injury, or is he just gonna be annoying and take away production from a top end guy, which is obviously could be the case with our guy Blake Corum. Which, hey, shout out. I hope he does it. I hope he's able to, with no disrespect to Kyren Williams, it's just rooting for our Michigan guy. I was able to get his way on the field and take as much production away from Kyren Williams as possible. But the Pacheco, Etienne, Mixon, Cook tier, like I said, I think that's kind of its own thing. I don't know if there's a breakout number 1 guy from there. Maybe Etienne, but he was RB3 last year. Is he a guy that, the next step for him is to be, RB2, RB1? Is he in that range? Slide in the DMs if you're with your Travis Etienne case. If you have the case for Travis Etienne, slide in the DMs. I want to hear it because I've already moved them up my big board today. Make no mistake. Like I said earlier, the big boards are a changing. Etienne is moving up, and I could use some help with the case for Travis Etienne. But Joe Mixon, there's some interesting guys scattered throughout the rest of the draft. But I think like we did with the receivers, we covered the top of the receivers. Pause. We'll cover the top of the running backs on this episode. And who knows when we'll get back into the fantasy. We'll definitely, like I said, adopt a fantasy son before the season starts. We'll identify our breakout player, because I was thinking about it too. I was like, we don't need to like actually adopt one before anybody's draft, because we just need to we just need to claim the breakout guy before the season actually starts. I can just draft my team, and I have all the bench spots to decide between all the bench guys, and then as the year plays out, make the cuts, work the waiver wire, do the trades, build the roster the best as possible. But we can make the decision maybe a little bit later in the year compared to years past, because I'm still deciding. It's a tough year. And like I said, we need to get back on track. We need to build some momentum. The Isaiah Hodgins pick, it really hurt. And that's not Hodgins. We'll blame it on Danny Dimes. We still have stock in our guy Hodgins. Do we need to start free Isaiah Hodgins? Maybe we'll start a free Isaiah Hodgins movement. And the Chiefs? Isaiah Hodgins to the Chiefs? Get some receiver with some size in there. To add to the Marquise Brown, Xavier Worthy, Rashee Rice. Do they still have MVS? I'm not even sure. We'll get into the rest of the fantasy football preview stuff as the month unfolds. But like I said, it's gonna be a packed sports weekend this week. So stay tuned for this upcoming episode. There's just some special stuff in the works. You're just gonna want to stay tuned for all the upcoming stuff. It's gonna be fun. The Rem and Sam podcast on Instagram, Rem and Sam podcast on YouTube. We're on Spotify, on Apple. We're just on the internet. Make no mistake. We're out there for you guys to follow. So stay tuned for that. And thank you guys for staying tuned and for following up until this point. We really appreciate it. So shout out to you guys, and thank you for listening again to this one.